Hello and welcome to this month's webinar presented by Lexby on what should be a very important topic for all of us involved in the eDiscovery processes. This month's webinar is Litigator's Guide to Mac eDiscovery, Mac and iOS collection, processing, review, and production. I'm your moderator, Philip Hearn, and I'm just one of the eDiscovery specialists here at Lexby. Before I introduce today's presenter, I would like to let you know of a few things that we have available in regard to today's webinar. I need that. Webinars take place monthly and cover a variety of relevant topics here at Lexby. If you have any technical issues or questions with not only today's webinar, but any webinar that we've had in the present or future webinars, please email us at webinars@lexby.com. Lexby webinars are also available in video and MP3 podcast and PDF. This webinar and the complete listing of all of our webinars are part of our webinar series. And again, for any future notices of our webinars, please contact us at webinars@lexby.com. And please also follow us on LinkedIn. As followers of ours on LinkedIn, you will receive the first notice of any new webinars and newsletters that are available to you. And for today's webinar, I would like to introduce you to Karsten Weber. Karsten is our founder and CTO of Lexby. He is our chief architect in developing our software and our service protocols. He is an eDiscovery consultant and expert with many years of prior experience in the industry, and he holds his MBA from the University of Texas and an MS in engineering from the Danish Technical University. Again, I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, and with that, I will turn things over to Karsten.
Thank you, Philip. Much appreciated. I'm Karsten Weber, and I am very excited about today's webinar, which is about how Mac ESI, electronic stored information, affects litigation. Macs are very dear to my heart. In a previous lifetime, I was a Mac developer for more than 10 years. Today's webinar is going to focus first on the growth of the Mac real quick, and then we're going to go into the EDRM specific steps of how do we collect data, how do we process data, how do we review data, and how do we finally do the production of any kind of data where the Mac files are present. And finally, we've compiled a list of practical takeaways that can be used as a checklist in the future. So with that said, let's jump right into it and talk about the growth and adoption. So basically, the Mac has always been around as a very strong consumer product and has been used in certain industries in general, but they have not been, that well adopted in corporate America. That's changing. I mean, we've seen with the Mac OS, and we've seen with the iPad and the iPhone how Fortune 500 companies are now starting to really adopt the Mac. Sample size of one, my wife works for VMware, which is a technology company with close to 20,000 employees. And in the past, I mean, everyone was on a PC, and now they're very much encouraging Macs. And so she has a Mac. Several other people in her group have Macs. Even a company like IBM, the founder of the PC, are now allowing employees to have Macs, and have actually found that they need fewer people to support the same number of Mac users than the staff needed to support the corresponding number of PC users. So the actual number of Macs are still fairly low, but it doesn't really matter what that percent is, because what really matters is your next case. Is your next case going to have Mac data in it or not? And the bottom line is that it's the likelihood of that, the chance that there will be Mac data in your next case, is increasing. Let's talk about collecting Mac data. So Mac data, let's start by looking at how data is stored on the hard drive. On the PC and on the Mac, they use different formats. So on a PC, the format that's used at the lowest level to store the data is in a format called NTFS, stands for Newer Technology File System. And on the Mac, it's stored in a format called HFS, which is Hierarchical File System. And those are fundamentally different. So while the user interface may look somewhat similar, they're both GUI-based, you're moving things around, I think it's important to understand that fundamentally they are different. The same with the file types. They're not the same way that they stored. So that means when you're moving data from a Mac to a PC, certain things like metadata with date created and date last modified are easily lost. And in fact, you can't just plug in a PC drive on a Mac and then write the data to it in order to collect it. Another difference is the character. If you look at these characters here, all of these are not allowed on a PC, and on a Mac, all of them but one is allowed on the Mac, which means you have all these characters // that cannot be used on a PC, but they're perfectly valid on a Mac. And in fact, Mac users would say, well, of course I need to use a colon in my file name. And so if you just move those files from a Mac to a PC as part of collecting it, you either have to use some more special care will have to be taken, because that file name is not valid on a PC. And one excellent example of that would be a Dropbox issue. So if you collect data from Dropbox, and I think we all know that as a web-based storage solution, you would think that because it's in the cloud, that it was somewhat, that it could be used on several different operating systems. But in fact, if you have data that's uploaded from a Mac to Dropbox, and then you try to collect it on a PC, what will happen with these files that have these special characters in them? Well, you download them on the PC and they simply don't appear. They're just dropped. Even worse, if one of them is a folder with one of these characters, every single file underneath will be dropped. And we ran an example just as a test where we collected about 10,000 files from Dropbox that were generated on a Mac, and then we went on Dropbox and collected the same folder on a PC, and instead of getting 10,000 files, only about 7,000 files came down. And you may think, okay, that may not be a big deal. That will be caught in the QC step that there are files missing. But for Dropbox, there is no way of getting out that file count. So there is no good QC step. You would have to go in and open up every single folder in Dropbox. And this was heavily nested, 10, 15 levels down with thousands of folders. It's just not practical. There would be some human errors involved in that. And so you have a silent failure. If you collect from Dropbox, you would have a silent failure. You would only get 7,000, not your 10,000. And you have potential malpractice on your hand. So for that reason, the data has to be collected, Mac data has to be collected on a Mac. You have to take special care the metadata is preserved. You have to identify the Mac data early in the process, and then you can do early case assessment to know what kind of files do you have, what file types, and you might consider doing that on the Mac as well, and then only moving over the amount you actually need. The bottom line is, and literally the bottom line here is that be aware that most vendors cannot handle collecting Mac data. There are these subtle issues, and most of them, if they're just used to PCs, there's a lot of traps. Okay, let's move on to processing the Mac data. Again, files and PC files are different, Mac data must be processed differently than Windows data. For example, different file formats. On the PC, we see a lot of EMLs and MBOX. Sorry, on the Mac, we see a lot of MBOX and EMLs, whereas on the, oh, hang on, I'm gonna start over on this slide because I'm reading this wrong. Okay. So processing of Mac data, the files between PCs and Macs are fundamentally different. And that means that they must be processed differently. And if you, for example, we have different file formats. On the Mac, we see MBOX and EMLX. On Windows, we see the EML and MSGs as the file that holds emails. On Apple, we have the iWork with pages, numbers, and keynotes. On Windows, we see a lot of MS Office with Word and Excel and PowerPoint as the equivalent. And so we need to take the Mac files and we need to render them into a format that preserves as much of the fidelity as possible. And PDFs are very ideal for that. That way, by converting all of the native files into some common format like PDF, we're now able to review them and work with them on either a Mac or a PC, and we can produce them, we can handle them just like any other ESI. But this processing is, if you have something that is normally just doing PC processing, it could come across these files and make a mistake. One example of that would be the Keynote, which is the PowerPoint equivalent. A Keynote file, they have two different formats of that. They have an older format and the newer one, the older one. The Keynote file was a .zip file on the Mac. So it was effectively a bona fide zip file, but the Mac knew that this was a Keynote file and it was able to keep it together. You double-clicked on this file and it would open up a beautiful PowerPoint. If you just took that file across to the PC side, now it was a bona fide zip file. You open it up and inside it would be like 1,000 files. And it would be the text from slide number 7. It would be the image, it would be the logo, it would be the header, it would be the structure of where things were placed. All of that information was just there as loose files. And so if you process this on a normal PC processing, it would take this Keynote file and it would split it into its atomic parts, and you would end up with 1,000 files on the PC to review, and they wouldn't make much sense because some of it all looked relevant. There were some pictures and there was some text, but it was now in completely in its atomic parts, and you wouldn't be able to review it. And again, I mean, we're looking at malpractice because you're not turning it into, not processing the file correctly. So when you have Mac data, be aware that most vendors just are not used to seeing Mac files, and they may not be able to process the Mac files correctly. Okay. Okay, so we're on to reviewing of Mac data, and should you review it using a Mac or a PC? And here the good news is that review platforms are now browser-based, and so you really have a choice. So in general, you should just use whichever platform you're most familiar with. I mean, if you are If you have a Mac, you're familiar with that. I mean, use that. If you have a PC, use that. You'll have no learning curve, and there will be no capital investment cost. However, there are some subtle differences to be aware of, and we'll go into those in just a minute. But let's start by looking at the similarities. So here we have a case we're looking at with some demo data. You got your standard screen. This is all being shown on a PC. You got your standard browse screen. You can look at the documents. You can open up a document viewer. And it looks like in this case there's some kind of spreadsheet with yellow and green background. And you can go in and code your document for responsiveness. So pretty standard on a PC. We switch over and on the Mac, we see it's exactly the same. I mean, it works the same. All the controls are the same. Life is good. However, as I said, there are some subtle differences. And let's start by looking at if you're on a Mac. The main benefit of being on a Mac is that if you're going through and you're reviewing everything in the PDF version, the processed version, you're fine. But then say you come across something that just didn't render in 100% into a PDF. So for example, there's a spreadsheet and you want to dive in, you want to see the formulas, you want to open it up, you want to know more about the spreadsheet. If that spreadsheet was from a Mac, then it was a numbers file, then you cannot open it on a PC, but now on this Mac, you can open it, you can work with it, and that goes for all of the iWork files and the emails. In addition, the Mac can open most of the common PC files as well without any additional, software. And then finally, I mean, you can do stuff like dual boot on the Mac where you can start both Windows and Mac and then switch over to the Windows side and then remove any remaining native PC files. So if you're on the Mac, you can get to reviewing all of your files natively when that's needed. And the drawbacks is really that a lot of review platform vendors, they give a lot of attention to the PC and not as much to the Mac. And so you'll see things where there are errors on the page that are showing up on a Mac, but they're not showing up on the PC. Subtle differences in the JavaScript will cause it to work on one platform and not the other. And they just haven't spent the same amount on testing on the Mac. There's even not as much anymore, but there used to be lots of examples where only Internet Explorer could be used and only if it had these plugins. And so it actually that some review platforms didn't even run at all on the Mac. So you need to make sure, check with your vendor, make sure your review platform is well supported on the Mac. And then on the PC, it's really the exact same thing in reverse, that they give a lot more attention to the PC in general in terms of support. And then the drawback is that the PC cannot open up several of the Mac native files, including the iWork files or the PowerPoint that we talked about earlier, which is called Keynote. So if you have a Keynote file, you've got to see what's inside it, or you got some numbers file, which is this Excel equivalent. You cannot open it on a PC. You have to get your hands on a Mac and open it that way. Okay. Searchability is, of course, critical. Text extraction, native indexing, dual indexing. What we're talking about here is some tools does not index Mac files well. So for example, DT search is an industry standard. It's used by a lot of vendors. And DT search by itself cannot index the iWorks, the Mac files. And so if you don't take care, you could end up in a situation where your Mac files are not being captured by a search. And again, I mean, that could be grounds for malpractice because you don't find those key documents. And so what needs to happen is you need to make sure that whatever index is being used, that they use the processed files. And so it's processed into something like a PDF, and then that's where the text is extracted from. And now your Mac documents indirectly becomes fully searchable. Finally, we're on to producing Mac data. Here you want to make sure what kind of production you have. Is it a PDF only? Is it a TIFF image one? Is it, does it include natives? All of the above. And I don't have too much on this slide other than to say that if you include the natives, stuff like the PowerPoints that are really a zip file behind the scene, you just want to make sure that the review platform can handle that. You want to make sure that you don't end up with some nasty surprise at the very end, and that your production will not be accepted by the other side. Okay, then we're into the practice tips. So this is really used as a checklist. So when you get in next case, read over these, and first one is when you're requesting Mac files, make sure you give yourself plenty of time. These things do tend to take longer. Figure out what platform you're going to be using, your review team. Do you need to review it in native format? How large is the team going to be? And if this is your first time, you may want to engage an eDiscovery specialist, learn from them, and then you can take it in-house, and just consider how you will be collecting the files and sharing them. So then collecting and processing, identifying all of the Mac devices. We've got the desktop, which is using the Mac OS X, and then we got all of the devices like iPads and iPhones that is using the iOS. So there are two different operating systems. You need to make sure if both are present, then you can collect from both of them. Then perform the early case assessment, really go in and find out who are the custodians, where they're coming from, how many devices from each, get that collected, and then try and keep it in the Mac side of things while you find out such things like if you have a cutoff and you say you're only going to look at a certain date range, then you can do that on the Mac, and you can make sure that you're filtering out all of the files on that at that point. The same with the extensions. You look at on the Mac, you can review a histogram of the different extensions and make sure which one of them needs to be called, which one needs to be moved forward. Make sure you don't use, when you're doing that, make sure you don't use a list that is from a PC, because if you have a PC-based list, it might say, hey, you need to pay extra attention to the .doc files and the .docx and the Excels and all that, and then the Mac equivalents would show up as maybe not important files to look at. And then for productions, again, make sure things are called down, deduplicated. You can also, in addition to deduplication, we recommend doing a near dupe as well, and that just helps take documents that are not identical, but they are, say 90% or more the same. They are really either revisions, or they could be, here's a here's a TIFF version, here's a Word version, here's a PDF version of the same file, and that way they get grouped, and it helps with the review, and it just also cuts down on inconsistently coded documents. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Philip.
Okay, well, thank you, Karsten. That was great information. I know I speak for everyone when I say that Mac is becoming more and more of an issue as we work through the discovery processes, so I know everyone is very grateful for the information. I want to remind everyone that as part of our webinar, we provide all of our participants with downloadable versions of today's seminar, along with additional resources for later viewing. We include this in a PDF version. It's also available from our website in multiple downloadable forms from MP3 podcast and streaming video. We also want to invite you once again to follow us at LinkedIn. You'll receive the first notices of future webinars, newsletters, and other news from Lexby. And also, if you have any technical issues with anything that you've been looking at today, or you have any questions about this topic or any topic that we have covered, or topics that you would like for us to cover on our webinars, please feel free to contact us at webinars@lexby.com. We really do appreciate your feedback, and we do read and listen to each one of the feedbacks that we receive from each and every one of you. So again, I want to thank you for that. And finally, one last slide for you before you leave. I want to remind you that Lexby is an Austin, Texas-based eDiscovery software and services provider offering a cloud-based hosted review and litigation document management platform. We offer the full spectrum of services from do-it-yourself to a full suite of technical, professional, and consulting services. We would love the opportunity to provide you with a demo of our services or talk to you at any time about help that we may be able to provide you and your team members. We're here to help you in any way that we can at Lexby. So please feel free to reach out to us at the numbers provided, which is 1-800-401-7809. You can reach sales at extension 22, or you can contact sales via email at sales@lexby.com. Whichever way you reach out to us, please know that we will get back to you quickly and have the solutions that you need. Again, thank you, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.